Welcome to the Real Women in Leadership podcast for women who are resilient, engaging, authentic, lifelong learners.
Co-facilitated by Kylah Morrison, the millennial leader.
Millennial? Well, I'm not a millennial leader, am I?
Yes, you are, Kylah.
Oh, I thought I was just on the cusp of Gen X, but I guess I do act a little bit more like a millennial. And Violet is our baby booming Harvard junkie who is a communications expert.
Absolutely. Love those 3 trips to Harvard to do wonderful learning. Kylah and I are sharing tips and strategies on how to be a successful woman in leadership.
So make sure you subscribe to the podcast to hear real stories from women in leadership in real time. Welcome to episode 1, where Violet and I talk about honest conversations and dealing with the tough emotions that come when we face uncertainty and change. And I think for everyone around the world at the moment, or in particular in the Western world, there is a massive amount of uncertainty considering the current situation with the health crisis. And there are some amazing things that have come out of it. However, at a microscopic level in ourselves and our emotions and our family units, there is a lot of turmoil. So we thought, what better topic to start off to talk about our emotions and how that affects us as leaders and how we show up as leaders in our communities and in our families and in our businesses or organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting, as we were talking before we started to record this today, is the rawness of those emotions. And you know, at certain points in the day or on a particular day, you go, you know what, I can handle this, this is all right, it's not so bad. And then another day and you wake up and you feel like you've just been in this nightmare, and you actually think you wake up, you're going to wake up and the day's going to be different. But the reality is life has changed, and we really have to step up as leaders in our families, like you said, in our businesses. And I think for me, you know, that's a challenge every day. And that's just being honest. It's a challenge. And I don't have small children, you know, that I'm looking after all day long. I'm really looking after myself and trying to be a big support to my family and my friends. And to be honest, this is probably my first week that I'm actually stepping up in my business to support my customers. And I'm happy to share some of those dilemmas, Kylah, as well during the session.
Yeah, fantastic. So as Violet said, we're both in different situations. I'm at home with my husband now, co-working upstairs, and I'm on duty majority of the day while he works in the corporate role, and I fit my business into 2 hours a day in the lunch break. So we thought we'd just start off with the both of us sharing our different situations and how we've had to try and show up for our families, and then at the same time hold space for our own emotions. So bit of a funny story, I guess. Not funny to start with, but I probably had the wheels really fall off about a week ago. Last Tuesday, I went to sleep on the Monday night, or maybe it was the Tuesday night, and we had the schools closed. Oh, it was on the Tuesday night. Oh, it was on the Monday night. So we had the schools closed on the Friday, and I knew that we would have the kids home for from the week 2 weeks earlier than the school holidays, and then it could be potentially 5 weeks when you consider the school holidays. And on the Monday night, I went to sleep, checked my phone before I went to sleep. I don't know where these bad habits are coming back into with endless amounts of social media checking. I feel like when we are in uncertainty, there's this desire to keep looking for notifications and looking for that next bit of information to tell us actually it's not as bad, or we can move forward in our problem solving, but it's not coming. And that's the reality of being in uncertain waters. And so I went to bed anyway with this notification from my husband saying, breaking news, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister for the UK, has announced we're going on lockdown. And I went to sleep, didn't really think about it, fortunately. However, the next morning, as I said, the wheels really fell off on the Tuesday when I wasn't sure about whether my nanny coming to work in the house, which had been working quite well on the Monday and the weeks prior, where she would have the kids in the afternoon and I'd have all afternoon to focus on my work. And I didn't know whether she should come, whether she shouldn't come. I have quite a lot of, I'm a sensitive person and I take on a lot of energy from other people. So for our cleaners, for example, I've been really affected by them losing a lot of work. And I said to my husband, what do you think we can do? And should I message all of our friends to say they're fantastic cleaners? And my husband said, well, yeah, you can do that, but it's not really our problem. And I'm like, well, you know, I've been in small business. I know what it feels like. So same thing with my nanny. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't have the information from advisors that I'd been using prior to that. And so I was just in this turmoil and I went through, stuff you've got the corporate job and your work takes priority again. And what are we going to do without the nanny? And oh my God, am I going to go back to that dark space that I've been in since having children prior to going back working full time? And then, you know, after going back working full time, I experienced anxiety for the first time in my life in about 2018 and came right last year with a lot of investment in my own self-care and talking to professionals and health professionals to help me through that. And I had all these panic moments all compounding together in a matter of hours. And I literally wanted to hit the panic button. I rang a couple of friends and they were going through their own things and they didn't have the capacity to hold space for them, which is completely understandable. And that's when I put the call out to Violet, and I just knew that I could download on her. She would listen and validate to my feelings, which I've learned is such an important thing to do. And from there, I could then know that I was warranted in feeling what I was feeling. Maybe it was unrealistic, maybe I was blowing it out of proportion, but being able to verbalize them and know that someone was really hearing me and validating those feelings helped me be in that emotion and move through that emotion, which I'll talk about in a moment in relation to Kubler-Ross's change curve in response to grief. But for me, it was quite funny because I was like, oh, I'm living with this really pragmatic, practical engineering person who's like, it'll be fine, we'll just work it out. And you know, when I went up to him to try and look for support and I'm having this meltdown and I dropped the 3-year-old on the floor, pretty much dropped, took her in, let go, and was like, you need to deal with her. And he's going, can I just have some kind of indication of what you want? And I'm like, she's just lost it. She'd picked up obviously on everything going on. She decided at that moment or 2 days ago, you know, once we'd started, you know, school had finished and we'd gotten the holidays, that she was going to toilet train herself overnight. And so she was wearing knickers to bed, and, you know, I think was on alert all night long and therefore a crazy woman during the day. And so my husband was like, okay, let's sit down, let's talk about it. Maybe if I could help Ollie with his homeschooling, and I'm like, I don't need you to problem solve. And he goes, well, you need to tell me what you do need. I'm laughing now because I have the words today, but in that moment I was so emotional and I was in so much fight or flight that everything was in my gut and I felt like I wanted to vomit, and I couldn't say to my husband, I don't have the words. You want me to give you the words so that you can problem solve my problems, but I can't find the words. And what I probably really was yelling internally but didn't have the words to articulate to him was, I need a hug and I need you to tell me it's going to be okay and that we will work through it together and you don't need to take this all on yourself. But I, in the moment, didn't have that, and so we had a bit of a blow up. Fortunately, he's seen me emotional before and he knows not to get too worried about it. And also I have there's another great video I've referred to recently on LinkedIn, a TED talk that I watched in person recently, and she talks about having that 3 a.m. friend, that 3 a.m. person that you can ring at any moment when you feel like you're not coping and you need their support. And that for me was Violet, and that got me through. That also meant that I needed to patch things up in the evening, and so fortunately when you co-work with your husband you can also have team baths, and so that helped to kind of just calm everything down and, you know, settle all the raw emotions that I was feeling. And interesting, like I didn't have a massive outburst of tears, which normally comes for me. I think I was fortunate that I could process that with Violet. And so I was just exhausted by that stage. And I think the words had finally come for me to say to him, I just need you to tell me that it's going to be okay. And fortunately, we could work through that. But yeah, it's interesting when you co-work with your husband.
And I think what's really interesting for me, and something that I know that I've struggled with, because, you know, as you reached out to me that day when you were going through, you know, your own situation, I think it was the following day, or maybe even the day after, that I contacted you because I was finding it really hard, and I was trying to make a difficult decision with a family member, and, you know, that whole internal dialogue that we have with ourselves, and I was restless all day and edgy and a bit agitated, not so much with, it was more with myself actually, and I couldn't really work out what was going on for me. And I think it was during that conversation with you that day when I contacted you that I realised, hey, Violet, you're not listening to yourself here. You're not really validating your own needs. Like, I just felt like I was sandwiched, and I think that's what I heard for you too, Kylah. That, you know, we're on, aren't we, as women all the time? We're competing demands, whether it's our business, our partner or our husband, or our children or grandchildren for that matter. And I think, you know, this crisis that we're going through right now, I think that brings that all to another level. And yeah. I think it's really hard. You and I were talking about us women, we have been so programmed to accommodate everyone else's needs, and we still find it hard to actually identify and speak our own needs. And I find that quite funny, you know, even, you know, at my stage in my life, that I'm still grappling to articulate my needs. And, you know, I train in this space. It's an area of absolute passion. And, yeah, I find that amazing, and I find it quite humbling. And, you know, it's why some of the good things that are coming out of this murky, horrible situation is that we are learning about ourselves and what we do well, and maybe some of the things that we don't do so well.
Yes, without a doubt. And I remember when we were talking about your situation, and even within your family unit, you had competing needs from your children versus competing needs from your extended family. And so it's not even that your family's pulling you in one direction, but maybe different members of the family are pulling you in different directions. And I think I even said to you, where's Violet? Like, where does Violet feel in all of this? And it's so hard to do. And even like you say, we train in this space, and I train in Kubler-Ross's change curve as a response to grief. I've been using that for years in my coaching and my workshops. I referred to it, you know, really diligently last year and the year before, when I was going through some really tough times, going full-time after having 3 young kids. And even though you understand the theory, when you go through it, there is like this, that was my biggest thing on Tuesday. I think I was beating myself up that I know this stuff. I've already been through a massive amount of uncertainty last year, leaving a really great full-time job to move to the UK with my family, to then be jobless and start again. I felt like I'd already had that practice, and there was this pressure on myself. You've been through it. You should be more resilient. It's that pressure we put on ourselves.
Yeah. And Brene Brown is a new podcast that you told me about, what is it, FFT?
The FFTs, effing first times.
Timers. Fantastic, ladies. Love you to watch it if you haven't seen it. It's just awesome. But she talks about in that first podcast about us not being clear about expectations, and I think that was that big thing that came through in that, like knowing what our expectations are and being realistic with ourselves. And even now I look back at that situation and trying to make a big decision about a family, I realised that in a lot of cases these weren't other people's expectations, they were expectations that I had put on myself to meet other people's expectations. I think I created them in some respects, to be honest. Now I look back, and it's that what we've talked about several times when we've had conversations in the masterclass about have the first negotiation with yourself. So I think probably what you and I have been grappling with is really connected to the Kubler-Ross grief and loss, but also our ability to negotiate with ourselves and articulate our own needs in all of that grief.
Yes, 100%. And if we look at the theory from Kubler-Ross, she basically talks about, I think the people that have been through our masterclass program will hopefully remember, there's sort of like an up, and then there's a down, and then there's a coming through and a realization when we're able to make the most of the situation and make meaning out of that situation. And so we start off often in shock or denial, and I think it's very easy to turn away from what our needs are when we're in that shock or denial, and then it's like the wave of the emotion comes whether we want it or not and whether we're ready, and then we're faced with typically anger and frustration, and only when we move through that can we give way to that sadness, that letting go, potentially depression, and hopelessness or feeling of loss of control, that when we move through that we can come through the other side and we get realization of where we're at, and we can engage that prefrontal cortex and start the problem solving and realize, well, how can I make the most of this situation and get, grow from it and make the most out of the learnings that I'm getting from the current things that I'm experiencing with that. So you used to show me a great podcast from the an article from the Harvard Business Review that talked about David Kessier, who is Kessler, who is the co-author with Kubler-Ross, I didn't realise, for the change curve, and he's added an additional part talking about putting meaning to those emotions that we feel.
Yeah, and that's and I think the question is, how do we give this crisis meaning? And for me, the meaning that I've attached is, for me personally, I was reading something from Russ Harris, from, we've also talked about Russ. And
the happiness trap, and the
happiness trap, and for me the meaning is about, how do I show up? How do I want to show up in this crisis? First as with myself, then as a partner, and as a mother and a grandparent, and then how do I want to show up to my team that I work with, and also how do I show up and want to show up with my business. And that's been a real wake up for me. Russ Harris has got a really nice outline on how to manage yourself and through this this crisis, if you want to put it that way. And I really liked those questions, and I've created that for me, like, how do I want to show up? And when I was sort of reflecting on today and our podcast, I thought, that's really how the meaning that I've attached to this situation for me right now. It gets me through. And when I'm losing my shit, I have to go, okay, how do you want to be, Violet? And there's certain people in my life that really need me right now, and I need to stay calm for them and be really present for them. And so far, I'm really grateful I've been able to do that for them. And, I need to be able to continue. And it's okay, look, don't get me wrong. It's okay for me to say, look, I need some time out or whatever. But I think, I think it's even about you and me doing this podcast right now. It is about showing up and really being clear with yourself. How do you want to show up? because we have seen people who have shown up really poorly, you know, like being abusive at shop assistants, or, you know, really quite being attacking and blaming. And I think if that's one thing that I could help people tonight to really stop and be reflective, I'd be really happy if that's the goal for me for tonight's podcast.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. We are all experiencing these emotions in different varying levels of the roller coaster at different moments. And as leaders, just to wrap up the podcast, we need to have that negotiation with ourselves first, as Violet mentioned. Make sure that we're turning towards validating our own emotions and not trying to push them away, because, wow, they come back in force if we don't acknowledge them. And then be aware of how we need to show up in our communities. And I think 100% that is super important right now. And as you said, there are people that are not showing up in the best way. There's also people who are not showing up at all. They've gone quiet. Even though they're in leadership positions, they've gone quiet. And that's probably the most inspirational thing I've taken out of what I've seen today is, and she's my idol and I harp on about her, but Jacinta Ardern is continuing to have Facebook Lives even after she put her toddler to bed the other night, and she was, you know, not dressed in her proper work clothes, which she apologized for, and I think, oh, why did you say sorry? However, she is continuing to show up. She's continuing to keep the dialogue open and say, we don't have the answers, but this is our plan, and we will revisit it every day, and I will make sure that I will keep in contact with you. And I just think that's an example of exceptional leadership. And Violet and I talked about recording these podcasts, and we thought now more than ever we need to be honest about what we're going through, and we need to be able to come together, Violet and I, which I felt so chuffed about, to hold space for others who may be going through these emotions that don't have people that they can talk to, perhaps their 3 a.m. person. Yeah,
and look, you know, as you and I have experienced all along since we've been working with each other, we might not, sometimes we don't have a lot of contact with each other, maybe for, you know, a few weeks, months sometimes. And then when we do need to be there for each other, we just have that capacity. So I think, again, if we can just really, and I've just written a blog post, and at the end of that I just made this call for people, look, if you need someone or you need something, you need to ask. And I think that's another really key message. Sometimes it's really hard. We're really blessed that we've got a relationship where we can ask each other, hey, I need to talk. Are you available? Or I need you to just listen to me rant. And like you said, Kylah, a lot of people don't have that. And so I just want people to know that that's so important, to reach out and ask for help. If you're having a shitty day or you're having a meltdown, it's okay. We're not here to judge. We're here to support each other. And I think that's, as leaders, that's what we need to be able to do.
100%. So that's our first episode on our podcast, about to be released very soon, and by the time you're listening to this, it will have launched. So we're very excited. We're glad to have you on listening to us, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Absolutely. Bye for now.